I mean, I can think of many examples of when I thought something was going right and smooth in the right direction, and then all of a sudden it blew up. The word that comes up for me when I think about failure is risk. I think about the appetite folks have to be risk-taking, in particular, like if you're on the continuum of like, I'm risk-averse, either as an individual leader or as an institution, or I'm risk-forward because I think, creativity or innovation or experimentation is what's needed to solve these very entrenched problems that we have in front of us as a sector. Oftentimes I feel like philanthropy in particular moves in this very status quo space where we're operating from what's been done in the past and not being really responsive to meet the moment, and therefore less likely to be willing to take a risk, which could result in a failure if we try something new, or if we're being, like I said, experimental or creative in our approach. Who actually is at risk if we don't try on new things, if we don't build relationship with folks outside of our comfort zone or outside of our institutions, if we're not expanding the aperture to think about solutions that come from a more collective approach. For me, that's a greater risk of failure, actually. Again, I think it comes back to ego and folks feeling some shame around, or some attachment of shame to failing. And we take it really personally when something fails, even if it's in the professional arena. I mean, I can think of many examples of when I thought something was going right and smooth in the right direction, and then all of a sudden it blew up. And it was hard to not take that to heart, even get emotional about it, especially if you've felt like you've been doing the right things to get to a certain point, or if you feel very vested in the outcome of something that you've tried or are working on. I can think of a few examples, but one example that stands out is I'm working in collaboration with some other funders and partners on an effort, and it was a project that I had inherited, so I wasn't with the project at the very beginning. And so I was just chugging along, doing the things I thought were the right things in terms of getting buy-in and being collaborative, and making sure we were talking to folks who were our partners in this effort. And then at some point, things started to go sideways and completely just erupted. And I had a moment where I was like almost in tears, because I thought the reason it failed was all about me, and it was, my fault, because I had put in so much work and so much effort to make sure that we were being collaborative, and that we were getting approvals and buy-in from all parties that were involved in this effort. And it did feel like a personal failure. But I think with some spaciousness, what I realized was that, one, the things that contributed to this effort failing, or at least having disruption happen within the effort, preceded me. and actually were things that needed to be tended to, but I had no clue that they'd happen because, again, I inherited this work. But what it did teach me, or I guess what I would say is the learning from that particular example around failure, is how important it is to take assessment of a situation, really understand both like the history of things, the relationships, the dynamics, particularly the power dynamics. Who are all the players? What do they need to feel like success? Do we have shared agreement and understanding about how we want to approach or move through a particular project or strategy? Are there any hurt feelings, particularly around something that you may not have been a part of its origin story, and you're just coming in, midway or at some part of the phasing of the effort? Really understanding, all parts of it, and in particular, like where are the tension points, and if there's anything you can do to get ahead of or address those. And that may be the other problem that I think folks might face when think about failure or not want to talk about failure, is the perceived punitive nature of what happens after failure. Will I lose my job? Will I be dinged in terms of my performance? Will I be seen as leaderly if I tried something and failed at it? And so also part of that is like, what is the culture of the organization or institution you work in? Is there an appetite for risk? Is there an appetite for failure? Are folks encouraged to try things even if it doesn't work out, even if it's a fail? And I think that's a different orientation to thinking about failure as something to be ashamed of, or an ending of something, versus like, oh no, this is actually an opportunity to learn, or the beginning of how we might iterate on whatever it is we were trying to do. I think it's important for philanthropy to talk about failure because the reality is the centuries of that philanthropy has existed, institutional philanthropy, there have been many failures. I have observed countless initiatives stood up, 10-year initiatives, 5-year initiatives, and resulting in, the outcomes not being what they were set up to achieve in the end. But I think where we mostly fail is we don't then take the time to do the reflective practice around, why did this thing not work? Why was it a fail? Why didn't it achieve the outcomes that we had articulated at the outset for this initiative or strategy? And not doing that debrief on the failure, for me, is a loss in learning. It's a loss in understanding the sort of approaches from philanthropy that result in us not actually making headway on these very intracted issues around economic justice, reproductive justice, social change in general, broadly. And so for me, the biggest failure is not actually taking the time to learn from what we don't get right. I think there is a apprehension to be vulnerable and transparent about when something doesn't work, especially in philanthropy when we've made these really deep, long-term, multi-year investments in an approach or a strategy, and then have it not result in what we anticipated or projected it to result in. And oftentimes I find that we just move on to the next thing. And we're like, okay, that initiative doesn't work. Let's try this initiative, without taking into consideration what were the characteristics that caused the thing to fail in the first place? What might we do differently to course correct? What did we learn from the folks that we were in this work with, whether it was grant partners or folks in community or our peer funders, and then using that assessment to actually build something stronger, more collective, more responsive, and more responsible